flame, lightning, storm, and stone. In a bygone era, these primordial forces were embodied by creatures that ruled the earth and sky. But the rise and fall of the Age of Dragons has left an enduring mystery for us to unravel. So let us follow the thread that begins beyond time itself and leads to a truth that is found between meanings. So, depending on which thumbnail I ended up choosing, you may already have a hint about the ultimate punchline of this video. However, as usual, there are a lot of connections for us to work through before we get there, and along the way we are going to unlock a much deeper understanding of Far Missoula and the Age of Ancient Dragons. I suspect that this video may draw many people ready to debate me in the comments, which you are welcome to do, but please actually watch the entire video first, as I promise there's a lot here to unpack. As ever, this video will contain spoilers for Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree, and has a moderate risk of blowing your mind at least once, so be ready for that. So without further ado, let's begin with the legendary weapon wielded by ancient dragons, lightning. One of the most iconic features of ancient dragons is their connection to lightning, and specifically to their distinctive red lightning. This is an immensely intimidating visual, but it also gives us a surprising number of hints about their nature. First, let's consider lightning itself. It is a surge of energy that begins in the heavens and then reaches down to the earth, forming a sort of bridge between the two realms. In the context of Elden Ring's larger cosmology, where divinity and life itself began in the sky and fell down to the lands between, lightning serves as an ongoing representation of divine energy entering the mortal realm. Except that it's not merely a representation. The Gravelstone seal tells us the worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in the Erdtree. After all, this seal, and lightning itself, are both imbued with gold. This item is not simply noting that lightning has a pale yellow color, but that it is imbued with gold, raw divine energy, not unlike that of the Erdtree. If we visit places where lightning naturally strikes the ground in Elden Ring, what we find are fields of golden flowers, called fulgur blooms. So it seems that lightning, though dangerous, has a life-animating power within it, what we might call a divine spark. For that matter, electricity surges within our own bodies, and in some sense truly is an animating energy within living things, at least in small doses. And there's another real-world feature of lightning that can inform our thoughts on ancient dragons, because, believe it or not, lightning can make stone. Fulgurites, also called fossilized lightning, are formed when lightning strikes fuse together minerals present in soil or sand. This process sometimes isn't actually hot enough to fully melt the materials, and instead sinters them, that is to say, compounds minerals together without actually liquefying them into a smooth material. This may be reflected in Elden Ring's gravelstones, which are described to us as clumps of sharp-pointed stones, and are, in fact, the scales of ancient dragons. In other words, ancient dragon scales may be formed by lightning, which would also explain why remnants of gold are visible within these scales, seen most clearly on the underside of an ancient dragon's wings. For ancient dragons, lightning and gold are not simply weapons, but part of their very nature. This could, in turn, connect to the origin of ancient dragons, or at least a reason for them to perceive themselves as innately divine, for they have been quite literally touched and blessed by the heavens. This could also help to explain why Dragonkin soldiers, by contrast, are unable to invoke true lightning, but instead have a distinct ice lightning. For the Dragonkin are not only separated from the sky, but were made by a civilization steeped in silver rather than gold. This also makes for an interesting inversion of the relationship between lightning and the everlasting dragons of Dark Souls. The everlasting dragons were beings of undivided nature, predating the origin of fire, and lightning was their undoing. This hints to us the very different role that ancient dragons play in the story of Elden Ring, for as ancient as they are still part of the greater creation story of all living things, and still connected to the power of the Elden Ring. Indeed, we can eventually find Placidusax, the dragon lord of an ancient age, who we are explicitly told was himself Elden Lord. But for all this talk of golden lightning, I've been sidestepping a crucial fact about ancient dragons, for the lightning they wield is red, hinting at another divine force they were deeply connected to, the Crucible. For regular viewers of my channel, this next connection will be unsurprising. If lightning contains gold, then red lightning is gold imbued with a red hue, and this perfectly matches descriptions of primordial gold from items like Ordovis's greatsword, the armor of Crucible Knights, and the gilded great shield. The greatsword says that its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself. And once we begin looking for them, connections between ancient dragons and the Crucible are abundant. There are multiple aspects of the Crucible incantations that seem to embody aspects of dragons, such as fire breath, tails, and wings. We have the storm and beast theming of Far Missoula, the same theming we find among the Crucible-worshipping Hornsent. We even have actual Crucible Knights present in Far Missoula. Several aspects of the Crucible incantations tell us that the Crucible was a place where all life was once blended together. As I noted earlier, all life includes ancient dragons, old as they are, and thus they are inextricably linked to this primordial energy. And yet, there is a tension between the primal origins of life and the ordered, civilized state the world repeatedly evolves toward. The Crucible Knot Talisman says the Crucible was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. Similarly, Crucible Knight armor states that in time, the strength shown by these knights, and even their appearance, was seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. This tension is mirrored by the beastmen of Far Missoula, who were granted intelligence and must have felt their wildness slip away as civilization took hold. This is a persistent and cyclical tension, as the wild energy of the Crucible and the order that descends from the heavens are interdependent forces. Though the Crucible is now scorned, there is a clandestine union of red and gold, even in the current order, as Marika is a unified being with Radagon. Not only is Radagon's hair red, but he is associated with the Crucible-touched Misbegotten. One Leonine Misbegotten was given Radagon's own sword, and, within the game's files, Misbegotten are referred to as children of Radagon. Now, take references to internal file names with a grain of salt, and I sincerely doubt that Radagon is literally meant to be the father of each Misbegotten, but rather, he is the half of the dual god, which is more closely connected to the Crucible. And the reason he despises his own red hair is that he has internalized the hatred Marika has for Crucible worship. But Marika and Radagon are not the only Lord-God pair we see that embody this fusion of red and gold. We also see it in Miquella and Radagon, a red-haired consort paired with a gold-haired god. We similarly see the red-gold pairing in two sets of demigod twins. Miquella and Melania are obvious, but there is also a red-gold pairing with Morgott and Mohg. Even though they lack red and gold hair, This can be seen in their great runes, and in the divine forces they seek to serve. We even bring the red element ourselves when we rise to potential lordship in-game, both by burning the Erd Tree and unleashing destined death. We must literally infuse the golden tree with suppressed red-colored energies in order to ascend. But it's not always the case that a god is gold-coated and a lord red. Consider Ranni, a candidate for godhood who originally had red hair. In order to ascend, she would have had to marry someone, presumably a member of the golden lineage. In fact, while this is speculation, it would make a great deal of sense if she was once betrothed to Godwyn the Golden. Their destinies were linked to each other on the night of the Black Knives, so it would be unsurprising if there was some pre-existing connection between them, rather than him being an arbitrary target. If he did represent the very destiny that she was trying to escape, then her decision to kill him makes much more sense. Also note that Dark Souls 3 includes a wedding ceremony that ends with human sacrifice, so Ranni turning the Night of Black Knives into a perversion of her intended wedding would be very on-brand for From Software. In any case, this video is supposed to be about dragons, so let's get back to that. So the unity of red and gold represents the fusion of fundamental underlying forces in the world, forces that we know were both important to the Age of Dragons. That being the case, we have another solid clue about one of the longest-standing mysteries of Elden Ring. Who was Placidusax's fled god? As a reminder, we're talking about this line from his remembrance. The Dragon Lord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. The fled god in question is the missing consort of Placidusax, the Marika to his Radagon. At the end of the Age of Dragons, Placidusax was mortally wounded, his god fled, and the collapse of their civilization followed. There are countless theories out there about the dragon god, but before we try to provide our own answer, let's refocus the question by asking what kind of being we are looking for. Here are the characteristics I think we should expect. Number 1. A being connected to divine forces that complement the power of Placidusax himself, particularly the Crucible. Number 2. Probably a dragon. This isn't necessary, but given that this is the Age of Dragons, it would make the most sense. 3. An equal of Placidusax in terms of raw power. The nature of their power can be different, but the two are supposed to work together to invoke the powers of creation. 4. A being with authority among the ancient dragons. This was their god, after all. And 5. A being that fled from Placidusax at the time of his downfall. Again, I've seen many theories, but they often stray from these core concepts. For instance, neither the Elden Beast nor Metyr really make sense as candidates for the fled god, in my opinion, because they are simply the wrong category of being. The Elden Beast is the very divine entity that the dragon god is supposed to commune with. It would be a little circular to say that the god is the Elden Beast itself. Similarly, I've heard theories that the dragon god could be a human, and while this is theoretically possible, the Age of Dragons has a pretty clear hierarchy to it, with dragons on top, and humans, beasts, and beastmen all serving them. While there are artistic depictions of humans in Far Missoula, they are never juxtaposed with dragons, but instead with beasts. In fact, it's easy to forget just how ancient the beginning of the Age of Dragons was, because our main archaeological reference is Far Missoula, which is explicitly the remains of a giant mausoleum enshrining an ancient dragon, guarded by chosen beastmen, who wield weapons clad in lightning. In other words, Far Missoula was built to be an acropolis enshrining Placidusax at the end of the Age of Dragons. It is the equivalent of a great pyramid or other colossal memorial structure, not a representation of the Age of Dragons as a whole. For all we know, humans may not have even existed yet at the dawn of Placidusax's reign. Our candidate god must be extremely old indeed. In any case, it's time for me to stop beating around the bush and make my controversial claim. For the fact is that we know exactly who fled from Placidusax at the downfall of the Age of Dragons, and they map onto every other trait we have identified for the fled god of Placidusax. Allow me to introduce you to Bayle the Tyrant. This all leads us to Bayle, the oldest, vilest dragon of all. He is by far the most crucible-coated dragon in Elden Ring, with horns not just on his body, but growing on his heart. He wields flame lightning, an ability that merges the most pure expressions of the energies of red and gold. And he is connected to magma, the melting and reshaping of stone. But aside from the destructive forces he wields, he also represents life. His heart says that it will continue to rage even after his death, and eventually consume the one who devours it. And this undying vitality has even been passed down to his descendants, as Ghost Flame Breath says that some dragons were endowed with such vivacity that even in death they could not fully die. This likely underlies dragon communion in general, as dragon hearts contain lingering crucible vitality and power that can be acquired by devouring them, power that risks transforming the partaker beyond recognition. But Bayle also represents life, simply by virtue of having a bloodline that followed him. We learn in the DLC that all modern dragons, also called drakes, are of Bayle's blood. Meanwhile, the ancient dragons are, as their name implies, all ancient. There don't seem to be any new ancient dragons being born, no further offspring of Placidusax, at least after the fall of their empire. So why does Bayle have a bloodline that continues to the current day? Why does Bayle have such a powerful connection to the Crucible? And how was he able to challenge the very Elden Lord and fight him to a draw? There are several possible answers, but there is one so simple that it's almost shocking. Bayle is Placidusax's fled god. Now, to be clear, I am not presenting this as an established fact, but I do think it's clear that the standard narrative about Bayle is missing something fundamental. The most common interpretation of Bayle is that he is a much younger, upstart dragon who just happened to be strong enough to challenge Placidusax. And I think that story is choosing to ignore the nuance of what is going on with the ancient dragons. The narrative we get about Bayle does imply a subject rising to overthrow his leader, but only in tone. The actual title used to describe Bayle, repeatedly, is Tyrant. We also know that there were ancient dragons who took Bayle's side, implying that he had a legitimate claim to power of some kind. This is noted by the hefty red lightning pot, which says, "The ancient dragons who betrayed their lord to side with a tyrant were known for wielding branching red lightning." In fact, Bayle's other title, Bayle the Dread, is a translation of Boryu, which literally means violent dragon, but could also be read as a compound of the words for dragon and tyrant, Bokun. The Dragon Tyrant is Bayle's truest title, and the word reoccurs in several descriptions, including his most iconic spell, Bayle's Tyranny. The Dragon Communion Priestess does literally tell us that Bayle is the oldest and vilest dragon of all. Now, this certainly could be interpreted to mean that he is the oldest of the Drakes, his bloodline. but that's not what she actually says, either in English or Japanese. He is called the oldest dragon, full stop. Notably, in Japanese, the game uses the distinct word Hiryu to refer to modern dragons, including the very first dragon most players encounter, Agil. The characters here literally mean flying dragon, but once the importance of the distinction from ancient dragons becomes more clear in the DLC, the English starts consistently translating this as Drake. So flying dragon Agil could also be translated as Agil the Drake. But Bayle himself isn't actually called a drake. In fact, the word she uses in Japanese to call him old is the same one she uses to refer to herself as an ancient dragon. And the kanji is the same one used throughout the game to distinguish ancient and modern dragons. So instead of being a more modern variant of dragon, she may be suggesting that he is even older and more primal than the other ancient dragons. Now, it's true that all of the language about Bayle is very morally charged. It refers to traitors, to a tyrant. Bayle is called vile and dreadful. But then, we know that we're getting a very one-sided story. We are hearing most of this from Florissax, the Dragon Communion priestess, who is loyal to Placidusax and has dedicated her life to bringing Bayle low. Whether he's vile or not, the fact is that he was a dragon connected to primordial divine power, held to have a valid claim to power by many ancient dragons, and who battled Placidusax to a draw. It would, after all, be very strange to call a rebellious upstart a tyrant. What's more, Placidusax and Bayle are natural complements to each other. Placidusax is visually coated around the head, which he had 5 of in his prime, while Bayle's power is centered in his heart, that will go on. Placidusax is connected to the sky, and resides in the heart of a storm, while Bayle is rooted in the earth, and is found on a volcano. They are natural avatars of divine forces that are meant to harmonize with each other, of order from the heavens and the crucible of life. In the base game, we're told that Placidusax is endlessly awaiting his fled god, then learn in the DLC that his actual object, since the fall of his empire, has been pursuing Bayle to claim his heart. This is Placidusax's highest priority after the fall, bordering on obsession. He asked 2 of his loyal ancient dragons to sacrifice themselves to facilitate the original Dragon Communion, as we're told by the Rockheart, and a 3rd ancient dragon to assume humanoid form as the Dragon Communion priestess, all so that humans might eventually claim the heart of Bayle. There's even mirroring in the design of their arenas. If you zoom out of the fight with Bayle, you can see that his seat has regular impressions in the earth, forming a circle around him that almost perfectly matches the graves, forming a circle around Placidusax in his seat beyond time. Except that Bayle's arena, unlike that of Placidusax, has not been spared the ravages of time, and over untold eons, it has deteriorated into a mere shadow of what it once looked like. Probably made worse by the raging dragon tyrant in the center of it. It's also worth noting the theme of cyclical history. One of the roles Farum Azula plays in the story of Elden Ring is to show us that despite the Golden Order's claim that Marika is eternal, this has, in fact, all happened before. There was an even more ancient Elden Lord who thought his own reign would be eternal, and was proven wrong. So it is fitting to think that the Order of Ancient Dragons ended exactly as the Golden Order does, with a god and lord fighting for control of a power that they can only effectively wield together. Together, they once clad their brood in golden scales and lightning. Together, they had the ability to create life and bless it with intelligence. But apart, Bayle's offspring deteriorate and become mere beasts, while Placidusax can create no life at all. I'm not going to address every question or alternative that I anticipate to this theory, but I will address the elephant in the room, which is that Bayle and Placidusax are both apparently male. I have repeatedly claimed that Marika and Radagon are an alchemical rebus, a union of male and female into a single higher being. Is this thematic reading undermined by gay dragons? The short answer is no, but I'll elaborate. Firstly, as I have said many times by now, the rebus is symbolic of unifying opposing elements. While it is also literal in the case of Marika and Radagon, the core of the thematic is unifying complementary aspects of the world, not just gender specifically. We see this, for instance, in Miquella and Radagon. While they are both male, the unity of opposites theme is still abundantly represented. Radagon is the physically imposing warrior, while Miquella is the slight and gentle avatar of divinity and grace. Radagon wields sorceries, while Miquella wields incantations. Radagon not only has red hair, but after being fused with Moog, is directly connected to the red-coded divine forces of the Crucible and the Formless Mother. Meanwhile, Miquella is the most pure avatar of gold possible. It's sort of his thing. But there is also at least a complexity of gender expression in the Miquella and Radagon pairing, because Miquella has a female aspect in Saint Trina, even though he sheds that aspect shortly before ascending. There is a similar gender complexity at work in Bayle and Placidusax. Placidusax notably has 2 heads when we confront him, and before the confrontation with Bayle had 5. But as pointed out by Zuli the Witch, the 2 remaining heads are not identical, and are identified in game files explicitly as a male and female head. So, Placidusax is not only multiplicitous, but already contains male and female aspects. Also, it's possible that gender for ancient dragons might just not mean quite the same thing that it does to us. These are beings so ancient that many aspects of the world we are now familiar with may not have been fully divided yet. And speaking of being undivided, Placidusax's 5 heads make for a fairly obvious parallel to the 5-fingered hand that represents intelligence, according to the Senkadea item. Indeed, Placidusax is the very embodiment of intelligence granted from on high, and his name means the calm stone, a compound of the Latin placidus and saxum, presumably referring to the emotionally detached imposition of reason and civilization. After the confrontation with Bayle, however, the 5 heads of Placidusax have been divided. There are 2 heads left on Placidusax, Avatar of Order, and 3 of his heads can be found still attached to the body of Bayle, who is themed around fury and magma, which melts things together. This thematically mirrors the 2 and 3 fingers, avatars of order and chaos in the current age, which have long been interpreted as parts of a once unified 5-fingered hand. Now, to be clear, I am not saying that Bayle is a servant of the 3 fingers or the flame of frenzy, but that this divide is being reflected through the same numeric symbolism in both cases. And after the avatars of the divine tore each other asunder, the legacy of the full 5-fingered hand and civilization would be carried on by the small, mortal creatures that rose up in the shadow of the ancient dragons. For all the focus we've put on dragons, they make up a small minority of the inhabitants of Far Missoula. Rather, the first creatures we encounter upon arriving here are beastmen. They may appear to be brutish creatures, but appearances can be deceiving, and we quickly discover the dexterity that accompanies their well-balanced blades, and their ability to wield incantations. For beastmen are not simply beasts. They are something in between beast and man, just as their name suggests. Once we start thinking of them in these terms, we can quickly realize that this imagery appears repeatedly throughout Elden Ring. Marika and Ranni are both granted bestial shadows when they are named Empyreans, and Godfrey is merged with a beast when he becomes Elden Lord. This last example is particularly strange, because it is said that Godfrey took the Beast Regent Serash upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. That is, before becoming Elden Lord, Godfrey, or rather Hoarah, was such a ferocious warrior that he couldn't serve as a lord unless he somehow quelled his lust for battle. But if he is a ferocious, beast-like warrior, then why would adding a beast make him more civilized? The key is that they are no longer separate beings. Hoarah and Serash become two parts of one person, and only at this point does Hoarah take on the name Godfrey and serve as first Elden Lord. Hoarah is a beast of a man, but by taking on a Beast Regent, he effectively displaces that aspect of himself. Serash serves the role of beast, which allows Godfrey to serve the role of Lord, a more civilized, dignified man than Hoarah ever was. We see a similar dynamic with the shadow-bound Malekith, for he does Marika's dirty work and bears a dark burden on her behalf, allowing her to remain comparatively pure, or at least to maintain the outward image of purity. And so we return to the beastmen of Far Missoula, and see that they are not merely servants of the ancient dragons, but serving a particular metaphysical role. They are a bridge between the wild, primal crucible and the elevated minds of those who impose order from the heavens. The same tension that naturally exists between Bayle and Placidusax. We see that in Far Missoula's bestial sanctum, harmony between humanity and beasthood is reflected on the altar that Gurranq prays to. And note, this is a sanctum specifically for beastmen to pray within, as the doorway is far too small for a dragon to enter, at least back when the roof was intact. One wonders what the beastmen would pray for here. For blessings? For sacred entombment? Or perhaps to rise above their beastly natures and become more. The complex dynamic between beasthood and personhood exists not only among the separate creatures of the world, but also within the self, and even within the heart of an ancient dragon. For we see this struggle play out in our Dragon Communion priestess, Florissax. She has given up her mighty draconic form to better serve as a link between ancient dragons and humans, but remains unfailingly loyal to Placidusax, ritually surrendering her sleep to him each night. If, however, we progress Tiolier's questline and receive his concoction, we can use it to lull her to sleep. And if we do, this is what Florissax says.
I succumbed to the deep slumber that was meant for my lord. 'Twas a craven act of a foul and lowly beast. Forgive me, good warrior. My lord will no longer look on me. I have fallen from grace, an old dragon no longer.
Florissax claims that by indulging her own desires, she has behaved like a beast, and therefore is no longer an ancient dragon. Notably, she says old dragon, but as I mentioned earlier, the Japanese uses the same kanji used for ancient dragons throughout Elden Ring, and that is clearly what she means by an old dragon in this context. She is claiming that to be an ancient dragon is to be above desire and need. We also see this reflected in the rock heart, which we find upon the jagged peak. It is one of the hearts used in the original form of Dragon Communion, granting draconic strength to humans to serve them in their hunt for Bayle's kin, and as the name implies, it is made entirely of stone, utterly bloodless. This is the heart of an ancient dragon that never hesitated to sacrifice itself at the behest of its lord. Then there is Florissax's heart. If we defeat Bayle without her ever succumbing to sleep, we find her heart at the end, a mix of stone and flesh, the heart of a dragon that felt the lure of her own need, but sacrificed those needs for her lord, a lord that is unforgiving of even slight transgression. If, on the other hand, she does succumb to the velvety sleep of Teolia's concoction, the experience changes her. She is, in her own words, no longer an ancient dragon. And if we ask her to join us, we gain her summon, which says, "Long ago, Florissax assumed human form to share dragon communion with the world. Now, she has acquired a human heart." This is reflected again in her incantation, the Dragon Bolt of Florissax, which says, "There was a time when the priestess never knew love, and thus never used this incantation herself. For it is love that can change lightning from a weapon into a source of protection." Placidusax and his loyal dragons believe that they are above the needs and wants of beasts. But need and want are as central to being human as intelligence is. And it is by walking the fine line of passion and self-mastery that a human could succeed where ancient dragons failed and claim the heart of Bayle. And yet, just as we finally become dragon-hearted, we teach our dragon priestess how to truly be human. It is a lesson that the god and lord of an ancient age were never able to learn. I suspect I've already said enough to shock much of the lore community, but I already started debating some of the finer points of this theory with my Discord users, and wanted to share a few of the more interesting points to come up. For one, remember those circular graves in Placidusax's arena, and Bayle's? Well, as old King Cole pointed out, they appear to be modeled after a real-world Zoroastrian Tower of Silence, or Dakma, which is a form of sky burial. The corpses are exposed to the sky so that they can be eaten by birds, a practice found in multiple parts of the world that cleansed corpses of material that would rot, leaving behind only bones. This may be part of Elden Ring's inspiration for deathrite birds, and it's even possible that death birds were important to Far Missoula. That said, keep in mind that, as I pointed out earlier, Far Missoula was built specifically to be a mausoleum, so it might be much more death-coded than the rest of the Dragon Empire was, especially given that ancient dragons were immortal, and probably didn't spend most of their time thinking about death. Another obvious reason for these graves to face the sky is that the Beastmen worship sky-faring dragons, and in general, Far Missoula is designed with a mix of enclosed spaces and open-air worship spaces, to accommodate the mix of dragons and beastmen that reside here. Either way, it's a very cool architectural connection. And speaking of architecture, remember my comparison of Placidusax's mausoleum to a Great Pyramid? Well, after finishing the first draft of the script, I was looking through the Japanese text and realized that Bayle's Mountain, called simply the Jagged Peak in English, is actually called Mount Giza in Japanese. If you're not familiar, Giza is where the Great Pyramids are, the famous ones. Considering the deteriorated hints of an intentional structure at the top of this mountain, a structure which mirrors Placidusax's mausoleum arena, the entirety of this mountain might be understood as a massive tomb, a great pyramid to enshrine the fallen dragon tyrant. Not only does this make the mirror with Placidusax stronger, but it helps to contextualize their grievous injuries. Placidusax and Bayle didn't just wound each other, they both, in a very real sense, died. The Japanese text for the Talisman of the Dread pretty much says this outright. This dragon tyrant's name was Bayle. He once challenged the ancient dragon lord, and both of them were wounded and fallen. The text says they were both defeated or felled, and afterward, we know that Placidusax removed himself from time to forestall his death, while Bayle seems to have a very different kind of immortality. Like some of his later-born descendants, he has such overwhelming vitality that even in death, he cannot fully die. So he remains in the realm of shadow, in a giant tomb of a mountain, raging even after his fall. Another major point that came up about Bayle is that his story and themes are largely about resisting subjugation, which seems at first to align with the idea of him being a rival lord, rather than a god. However, in the game we have multiple examples of gods struggling against subjugation, particularly Rani, who was a candidate for godhood, but did everything in her power to avoid the fate that the Two Fingers had in store for her. Similarly, Marika, at the end of her reign, shatters the Elden Ring in an act of defiance, for which she is punished by some combination of the Fingers and Radagon. Even in Miquella's story, we have the words of Saint Trina, telling us that godhood would be Miquella's prison. So the idea of godhood as a gilded cage, as a kind of subjugation that one would seek to rebel against, is in fact a theme very often repeated within Elden Ring. But with all of that said, I will reiterate that there are reasonable alternatives to what I have put forward about Bayle. In particular, there are two alternatives that seem most plausible to me. One is that Bayle is Placidusax's twin, in which case all of the mirroring and the red-gold divide makes just as much sense. As I noted in Gut Check, there is a similarity in the relationships of a twin and a spouse within Elden Ring's world building. And yes, I do hear how that sounds, but what I mean is that they are two different ways of expressing the metaphysics of duality, the interplay of division and union. The other plausible interpretation is that Bayle was Placidusax's child and presumptive heir, which would make his apparent authority make more sense. But it doesn't match all of the mirroring quite as well as a twin or consort relationship would. And one final side note, speaking of Gut Check, is that I doubt that either Bayle or Placidusax was the physical vessel for the Elden Ring. They certainly could have been, and then relinquished it upon their mutual death. But as I discussed before, one can also be a god by communing with the divine, even if the Elden Ring itself is in the moon, or a great tree, or some other vessel. If you have your own counterpoints, counter-theories, or the like, then you can share them with me in the comments, or check out my Patreon and join my Discord server from there. And if you like the idea of gay dragons, or just like unusually thorough and well-crafted Elden Ring theorizing, I do accept likes, hypes, and super thanks. So channel your inner Egon, prepare a hail of harpoons, and shout to the algorithm in the sky that this is some engaging content. Until next time.